So how does an idea or a set of ideas become so powerful that it can drive an entire nation to war and to genocide? To really understand Nazism, we have to go way beyond the simple stories we're usually told. So in this explainer, we're going to really break down how this ideology was actually built piece by piece. You've probably heard this story before, right? It almost always starts here, with a young, wannabe artist who gets rejected, not once, but twice by the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. It's this kind of compelling story, a simple tale of personal failure twisting into this monstrous world-ending resentment. Okay, but hold on a second. Is it really that simple? Can one guy's rejection from art school honestly be the single seed for a catastrophe that consumed the entire globe? Yeah, not even close. The real story is way more complex and way more deliberate. So, first things first, we've got to get past this failed artist myth. If we're going to have any hope of understanding where Nazism actually came from, we have to peel back these simple personal stories that kind of hide a much darker and more calculated truth. Okay, here's another popular story you might have heard, that Hitler's hatred of Jewish people started with his mother's doctor, who was Jewish. But the thing is, the historical record shows the exact opposite. He was actually really grateful to Dr. Eduard Bloch, so much so that when he became Führer, he even gave him special protection. So right away, this whole personal revenge story, it just falls apart. The roots of this thing weren't personal at all. They were political, and they ran so much deeper. Okay, so if it wasn't some personal grudge, then where on earth did this ideology come from? Well, this gets us to the raw materials. The truth is, Nazism wasn't invented from scratch. It was more like it was assembled, built from a bunch of ideas that were already floating around in the air at the time. I love this quote from the historian Joachim Fest because it just nails it. He called the whole scene a scrap heap of ideas. And that's the perfect way to think about it. Hitler wasn't some evil genius inventor. He was more like a scavenger digging through this giant scrap heap to find the ugliest, most useful pieces he could find. And right at the center of that scrap heap, you find something called folkish nationalism. Now, this wasn't some new thing the Nazis came up with. It was this powerful, ethnic-based nationalism that had been brewing for decades. And its core idea was that the German people, the folk, weren't just citizens of a country. They were part of one single, organic, racial entity. And believe me, this scrap heap was packed with some really potent, really dangerous stuff that had been bubbling up for a long time. You had this vicious anti-Semitism, this idea of a German master race. You had these grand ambitions like pan-Germanism and this obsessive demand for Lebensraum, or living space, in Eastern Europe. And all of it was just drenched in this deep, bitter sense of grievance, a hatred for the Treaty of Versailles, and a total rejection of anything liberal or Marxist. The ideas were already there. Hitler's real innovation was just seeing how to weld them all together. So how do you turn a pile of junk from a scrap heap into a weapon? This is where the twisted genius of the Nazis comes in. They took all these scattered, angry ideas and methodically forged them into a structured, coherent, and absolutely terrifying political ideology. And it's kind of fascinating in a horrifying way to see how they did it. First, you've got the Führer principle, the leader principle. This put all power into one man's hands and demanded total obedience. Then you give that leader a mission, conquer land for Lebensraum. And how do you justify that? Well, you create a rigid racial hierarchy, defining Germans as the master race and everyone else, especially Jews and Slavs, as Untermenschen, or subhumans. And finally, what's the reward? The Volksgemeinschaft, a so-called people's community, racially pure, unified, and free of class conflict. It was a complete destructive system. And check this out, a huge part of their strategy was to just straight up steal popular words and twist their meanings. Here's Hitler himself in 1923, literally laying out his plan to redefine socialism. He's going to rip it away from the socialists, strip out all the international class-based stuff, and rebrand it as some ancient Aryan German idea. This chart really lays it all out, side by side. I mean, look at the difference. Marxist socialism is all about class conflict. National Socialism rejects it for racial unity. One is internationalist, the other is fiercely nationalist. So you see, this wasn't socialism at all. It was a complete hijacking of the term, designed to trick workers into supporting a totally opposite agenda. Okay, so you've built the ideology. But an idea is useless if it's just stuck in a book, right? You have to sell it. So next up, we're going to see how the Nazis built one of the most terrifyingly effective propaganda machines in history. And here's the playbook, coming straight from Hitler's own book, Mein Kampf. The strategy was never to have a reasonable debate. The idea was simple. Don't bother with complicated arguments. Just boil everything down to a simple formula and repeat it, over and over and over again. And they turned this idea into a brutally effective 4-step method. Step 1, go for the gut. Forget reason. Target people's feelings, their fears, their anger. Step 2, create a boogeyman. Pick one enemy and blame them for everything. Make it simple. Step 3, the broken record. Just repeat those simple slogans and stereotypes relentlessly until they're impossible to ignore. And finally, step 4, own the truth. Only ever present one side of the story, yours. And to blast this message everywhere, they built an incredible multimedia machine that was impossible to escape. They made cheap radios, the people's receivers, so Hitler's voice could be piped directly into over 70% of German living rooms. They took over the entire film industry to pump out movies like Triumph of the Will. Party newspapers and posters were everywhere. This was way beyond simple media control. They were building an entire alternate reality for people to live in. And this brings us to the final, and frankly, the most important part. We have to understand that all of this, the ideology, the propaganda, it was never just about ideas. These words were always meant to be a blueprint for action. And let's be absolutely clear about this. This was always the end game. Every speech, every poster, every law was another calculated step down a very specific path. All that dehumanizing language, that wasn't just talk. It was laying the psychological groundwork, getting people ready for the state-sponsored violence that was always part of the plan. I mean, just look at how fast this all happened. It's absolutely terrifying when you see it on a timeline. Hitler takes power in 1933. Boom, just 2 years later, the Nuremberg laws turn racial theory into actual law. 3 years after that, you get Kristallnacht, where illegal discrimination explodes into organized, violent terror. And then, less than a year after that, the invasion of Poland begins, and the world is at war. It was a horrifyingly rapid descent. And this quote from Hitler, it just lays the whole twisted logic bare. Anything, no matter how inhumane, could be justified as long as it was for the good of Germany. They literally redefine morality itself to fit their goals. So we come back to that big question we started with. What we've seen is that the most dangerous ideologies often aren't brand new. They're built from old hatreds, old fears, just repackaged, weaponized, and blasted out by a relentless machine until they sound like the only possible truth. It's a really chilling reminder that words aren't just words. Ideas aren't just ideas. They can be picked up, sharpened, and forged into the deadliest of weapons.